welcome to Modern Poetry and Translations summer launch, a little bit late. This is our second digital launch. Our first for our Japan focus was in the spring, and it was really good fun, and I'm hoping this will be as well. This is for our summer issue, The World for a Moment, focus on Czech poetry. And we'd like to thank, as ever, a little bit late. Sorry? Was that my voice? Did my voice just reverb? Sorry. We'd like to thank, as ever, the Arts Council, the Czech Literary Centre as well for their support with this issue, and the Moravian Library for supporting this issue, and particularly Jan Zikmund, who's been a great help and wonderful to work with. We're hoping to bring some Czech writers over to the UK, but I think that's going to have to wait till 2021 instead. So we hope in the meantime this digital launch will be some kind of compensation and something to be thinking about for now. Obviously, a lot's happened since our last launch. I had to edit this issue whilst homeschooling a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, which was challenging. I love the cover of our new issue, which you can see behind me on my Zoom virtual backdrop and here, which is by a Czech illustrator called Toybox. And it really shows kind of children escaping the domestic world, which we were all under virtual house arrest, weren't we? And perhaps we will be again, through the power of their imagination. I think it's really beautiful. And that's something I hope that we can help you do tonight as we approach a second lockdown, and much of the UK is in a second lockdown. I hope we can give you some respite, some escape. There's lots of nice things in here I'd like to draw your attention to. One is here, a next generation translation project, house arrest, created by Rachel Long, which I was really thrilled to have in this issue. I think it's a beautiful thing. There's a Persian form I hadn't heard of before called the Lycos. That's really interesting. All sorts of beautiful poems in the general section, which is always at the front. And I wanted to read one poem to start, a poem by Christina Benjurna, I think. I'm terrible at pronunciation, as I was telling my guests earlier, a Belarusian poet. And her translator, Hannah Komar, I met at Translation Summer School, BCLT's Translation Summer School last summer. She's a lovely, lovely woman. And she actually has been working with me on translating some of my poems, which is really generous and nice of her. It's been a pleasure to work with her. I was emailing her just a couple of weeks ago, and I heard last week that she's been arrested. So I thought this poem, it would be nice to read this poem in solidarity. So this is by Christina Banjurina, I can't remember how I said it last time, translated by Hannah Komar. And it's called Mollusks. All I can is close up and look at others as if I've lost my tongue. To observe their habits, examine the lines of their bodies, search for the key to photos, only to find none, to see not, and not to notice on purpose, or simply that they have no interest in me, that I'm an exhibit in front of which they pretend they find something in it. From birth, we are enabled to open through others, feeling with one's skin the uniqueness of another's self. From all the images of world history, we chose mollusks that have to be hit against rocks to open. I'm opposed to violence in any form. That's why I have to close up and gradually lose the ability to utter words. All I can is enclose myself and wait till my insides are broken against the rocks. Then I will be able to speak again. Now, to move to the Czech issue. The Czech focus is amazing. Czech poetry is amazing, as I'm sure you all know, especially if you're followers of MPT, which has always had a relationship, of course, with poetry from Central or Eastern Europe, the centre of cataclysm, as Ted Hughes called it. Issue number 35 in 1978 was entirely devoted to modern Czech poems. And I'm delighted to have been able to do the same again with this focus. And we have two translators joining us, and also videos of two of our Czech poets generously made for us so we can hear the originals if technical things all go well. So I'm going to introduce our readers now. So first up, we have Teresa Riedlbauchová, who is a poet, translator, editor, and founder of the Literary Salon Press. And her books include Paris Notebook, that we're very excited about, which is being published by Verse Chorus Press in its translation by Stephan Delbos this autumn. We also have the translator, Stephan is here with us, and he's Poet Laureate of Plymouth, Massachusetts, and founder of web journal Body. And his books include Light Reading from 2019. And so we're going to hear a poem of Teresa's, then Stephan's going to read the English translation, and again, we're going to hear two poems now. Thank you.
Celý život jako přecházení z vězení do vězení a protahování zvrásněné roury komínem k nebi. Do mého bytu přichází mnoho mužů. Tento týden ve vaně stáli dva komíníci, sklenář si hrál s barevnými skly a tlustý kluk utahoval kolíčky v pianu. S milenci je to těžší. Ten z Paříže odletěl do Mexika a ten z Massachusetts bloudí mezi Amsterdamem a Berlínem.
Yes, this is an English translation of that poem, which is an untitled poem. A whole life passing from prison to prison and stretching a corrugated duct through chimney to sky. Plenty of men enter my apartment. This week, 2 chimney sweeps stood in the tub. A glazier played with colored glass, and a chubby boy tightened the piano's tuning pins. With lovers, it isn't so easy. The one from Paris flew off to Mexico, and the one from Massachusetts wanders between Amsterdam and Berlin.
Právě zemřel. Stála jsem s tátou a tetou Anny v obývacím pokoji ve Strakonicích. Rozdělovali nádobí a peřiny mezi sourozence. V pokoji zbyla už jen bílá kuchyňská kredenc. Táta přistoupil k oknu a řekl: podívejte, jak ty dědovy duby zdivočely. Pak jsem v místnosti zůstala sama. Dub si čelo opřel o okno a koncem větví prorazil sklem dovnitř.
The poem is called Grandpa Died 8 years ago, but he just died this morning. I stood with Dad and Aunt Anna in a living room in Strakonice. They divided the crockery and bedclothes among siblings. Only a white kitchen cabinet was left. Dad went to the window and said, "Look how wild Grandpa's oaks have grown." Then I stayed in the room alone. The oak leaned its face against the window and the branch ends broke through the glass.
Thank you very much, Stephan.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to talking about those poems more in a minute, but first we're going to hear from our other guests. Now we have 3 poems from Kateřina Rudčenková, who writes poems, short stories and plays, and her 4th collection, Walking in the Dunes, won the Magnesia Literary Award, and her work has been translated into over 20 languages. She was also in book a lot of people in the UK might know if they know any Czech poetry, 6 Czech poets, the Ark anthology. And her translator is Alexandra Büchler, director, of course, many of us know her, of Literature Across Frontiers, and editor and translator of many poems, plays and novelists. I note she's translated Jean Rhys into Czech, which is amazing. Jean Rhys is a heroine of mine. And she's series editor of Ark's anthologies, New Voices from Europe and Beyond, sorry, she was for over a decade, which was, of course, an incredibly influential and important series here in the UK. So we're delighted to welcome Alexandra. And as before, Kateřina has recorded some videos for us, so we can hear these poems in the originals, and then we will hear the translations.
Cizí akvária. Na cizích bytech mám ráda, že uspořádání věcí v prostoru je dané. Mohu je pouze obhlížet, jak dlí. V mém bytě mě znervozňuje opak, nedefinitivnost. Jako v životě. Křehkost, zranitelnost dnešního stavu. To, že bych teoreticky každou chvíli mohla vším pohnout jinam. Mé věci, šaty, skříně a stoly jsou prosyceny provizorností mého pobývání na zemi, mou nejistotou a smrtelností. Všechna cizí akvária nekriticky přijímám, pokud v nich není umělohmotný hrádek. Jen s tím svým se nedokážu smířit. Zdá se mi tmavé, jeho špína padá na mou hlavu. Jsem svědkem ryb, které v něm umírají a které musím vyhazovat do záchoda. Květiny v něm musí být přeskupovány, nahrazovány novými, protože žloutnou. Ale už mnoho let ho držím při životě. Kupuji nové ryby, topím jim, čistím písek a kameny a nedokážu s tím přestat. Ovšem, že dokud nepraskne a nevyteče, svoje akvárium dobrovolně nikdy nezruším.
Alexandra?
I know I have to unmute myself. I do this all the time. It's good to mute yourself when somebody else is speaking. Okay, here I am, and thank you very much for the introduction, and a big thank you for this issue, Claire. So this is the first poem called Other People's Aquariums. What I like about other people's apartments is that the way objects are arranged in space is given. I can only watch them be. In my own apartment, what makes me nervous is the opposite. Nothing is definitive. As in life, fragile, vulnerable, the way things are today. I could theoretically move anything at any time. My things, clothes, wardrobes, and tables are suffused with the provisional nature of my existence here on earth, with my uncertainty, my mortality. I uncritically accept all aquariums belonging to other people, as long as there is no plastic castle inside. Only my own aquarium I cannot come to terms with. It appears dark, its dirt falls on my head. I witness dying fish that I then have to throw into the toilet. The flowers in it have to be endlessly moved around, replaced with new ones because they turn yellow. Yet I keep it alive for years. Buy new fish, keep them warm, clean the sand and stones, unable to stop. Of course, until it cracks and the water pours out, I will never voluntarily abolish my aquarium.
Thank you, absolutely beautiful.
Chůze po dunách. I když si cítila dojetí nad prudkým odstínem zeleně, stromů a trav a borovicového podrostu. I když tě dojímala nostalgie dýmu toho léta, pálené trávy a pečených ryb. I když tě dojímaly děti, které ještě nic netušíce o restrikcích světa, už teď skákaly po dlaždicích jen jedné barvy. Přesto pod tím vším dojetím zůstávala z bezklamání chladná, jako ledová tůňka v sibiřském lese. Otáčela ses, aby ses ujistila, že stopy vytlačené do břehu už jsou smyty, nebylas, nechtěla být, nechtěla ses už do ničeho otiskovat.
Walking on Dunes. This is the title poem of Kateřina's latest collection. Walking on Dunes. Even though you were moved by the abrupt shade of green of trees and grass and pine tree undergrowth, even though you were moved by the summer's nostalgia of smoke, burning grass and grilled fish, even though you were moved by the children who, as yet innocent of the restrictions of the world, already skipped from one tile of the same color onto another. Despite all that emotion, you remained cold underneath in your disappointment, like an icy pond in a Siberian forest. You kept turning to make sure that footprints left in the sand had been washed away. Washed away. You were not. You didn't want to be. You didn't want to leave your imprint in anything at all.
Možná si sama to červené světlo na majáku, co nedovolí lodím a letadlům do sebe narazit, a ani o tom nevíš. Možná právě ty střežíš pevninu. Možná právě na tvém úpatí leží v písku radčí vejce, snesené k intimní večeři. Dost možná právě v tvé trávě na dunách, na jediném místě světa, hnízdí hejna vzácných ptáků. Ustup o krok. Tvá samota na špičce jižního mola má asi hlubší význam, než jen holé osamění.
Perhaps you yourself are the red light of the lighthouse that doesn't let ships and planes collide, and you don't even know it. Perhaps it's you who guards the land. Perhaps it's at your foot that a seagull's egg had been laid for an intimate dinner. Perhaps it's in your grass, on the dunes, the only place in the world that flocks of rare birds make their nests. Take a step back. Your solitude at the tip of the South Pier may have a deeper meaning than mere loneliness.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Beautiful, beautiful translations. So we're going to begin a discussion now. We've got half an hour or so, to a little bit longer, to talk about Czech poetry and about these beautiful poems we've heard. So a question to both of you. Perhaps I'll ask Stephan first, as he's in Prague at the moment. What is the Czech poetry scene kind of like at the moment? Are there any notable trends? What's going on, Stephan?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you know, it's easier to talk about trends in something like Czech poetry than maybe there is in English language poetry or American poetry. And I remember a couple of years ago talking to Andrej Budejas, who's a contemporary Czech poet, and we were kind of having this same type of conversation, and he was saying, oh, you know, a couple of years ago, everyone was kind of writing in this style, and then the next year, you know, people were doing this kind of condensed lyrical thing, and now people are kind of doing this. And it occurred to me at the time that it would be really, I would never venture to do the same thing about American poetry. You know, it's hard. American poetry, there's just so many people writing in English in the US, different styles, different kind of geographical points of production, and presses that are doing different things. So it's really hard to say that about American poetry or try to kind of narrow it down in any way that makes sense. At the same time, you know, I'm a little bit hesitant to try to point out, you know, kind of specific trends. I think there are a handful of, or more than a handful, I mean, there are just so many amazing contemporary Czech poets who are talented and doing really interesting work. I think there's kind of, we're seeing more translation of contemporary Czech poetry than we have, you know, ever before. And obviously the issue in your great work with the journal is evidence of that. And, you know, we've got Tereza's book coming out, Milan Jaczynski, another great contemporary Czech poet, kind of younger, has a book coming out in English pretty soon in Scotland, I believe. So the thing that I'm most excited about, really, rather than kind of specific trends or styles, is just that there's a great deal of kind of you know, transnational communication, lots of translation happening, and a lot of kind of mingling of Czech voices, Czech language, and international voices in other languages as well.
And it feels like a new generation, perhaps, of Czech poets are breaking through a bit internationally.
Yeah, I think, you know, a younger generation, people who came up after '89, are kind of grew up in a more international environment. And so I think that's, you know, they're kind of more internationally minded, maybe from the very beginning. And also there are more, you know, there are more international people in the Czech Republic, in Prague specifically, than there was before '89. So, and, you know, in the last 3 decades, a lot of great translators and poets, you know, Anglophone translators and poets have taken root in Prague. And that, I just see that continuing to, you know, to happen on an even wider scale, which is really exciting. Thank you.
And Alexandra, since your book, kind of 6 Czech poets came out under art that you were overseeing, what's changed since then? Have you noticed anything?
Well, I have to say, I really feel like I can't comment on this confidently, because I haven't lived in Prague for many, many years, for decades, and I love going there. I don't know, you know, what's going to happen now with this monster that is absolutely suffocating us. But and also with the, I mean, I'm talking about Brexit, but also the lockdown. It's a terrible combination.
The pandemic.
I haven't been back now for a year because of this, and it's. I just feel that I'm not in touch enough. I was very keen to bring Czech poetry onto the English language scene, especially here in Britain. earlier, because I realized to my horror that yes, there hadn't been a collection or issue dedicated to Czech poetry or Czech literature as such for quite a long time. And it's almost like this kind of comes in waves, because there was a lot of interest at the time when, you know, there were sort of the Czech dissidents were reaching out or were in contact with writers in the West, and there were publishing houses. You know, this is now kind of looking back at the history, but there was a time when there was a lot of interest in Czech writing and Central European writing and Eastern European writing on the whole. And then that kind of disappeared. And then again, I have to say that with the enlargement of the European Union, which allowed for this, you know, for these connections to grow and also to be financially supported. And I'll say more about that as well, because it is important. So there was another wave of interest, and this is how this book came about, and the whole series. I think what I find interesting about the Czech scene, and I absolutely agree with Stephen that it's really difficult to talk about trends, and although it's a small scene, it's much smaller obviously than the English language one, but I like its liveliness. I like the fact that there are, you know, so many events happening, that it's all kind of happening around, you know, literary friendships and maybe sometimes hostilities as well. But it is a very lively scene where people are genuinely interested in poetry, and you go to a reading, which I can't do very often, but you know, when I'm in Prague, I usually try to go. And for instance, the readings in Fra, which is a publishing house and a small cafe and bookshop. It's a very small space, but it's usually packed, you know, when there's something interesting happening. And there's a lot of other events. There's also, I would like to name one person who has been really instrumental in, you know, in setting up a wonderful festival, which is at the same time very low key. It's called Poetry Days, and or Poetry Day, singular. And the person I'm talking to is Bernie Higgins, an English woman who has been living in Prague for many years. And she really should be here talking about trends, because she's the one who knows, she's the one who follows it. And so I usually ask her. I also ask other people. But as I say, I think it's really what's interesting is that there's all this activity, there's a lot of publishing, and at the same time, I think the general readership is quite small. So yeah.
Somebody's I just seen a question popped up, and we'll be taking questions from the audience in a little bit. It's great, there's some questions already, but this seems just to carry on from what I was talking about. So Steve Pinhorn has asked, what key themes are Czech poets tackling? I guess that would be an extension of my question. What's the scene like? Are there any key themes that you think occur a lot in Czech poetry, or seem to be occurring a lot now? The pandemic? Is anyone writing about the pandemic? Because well,
I mean,
rumor has it we might be having a European pandemic issue in the spring, so I'd be very keen to know.
You know, it's funny again. I mean, because you want to feel kind of more confident in talking about themes and stuff, and I'm sure there are people who would, but you know, for example, the poetry of Kateřina Rudčenková and Teresa Riedlbauchová, you know, poets. I mean, on the surface, they're not two poets that I would, you know, too quickly kind of group together or something, but just listening to the poems that were read tonight, you know, there's this kind of a kind of intimate voice, a kind of, you know, intimate kind of, you know, thinking in the world, the thinking in the world, who is, especially in the aquarium poem, you know, there's the kind of, it's almost this, you know, the poem brings up a kind of almost philosophical idea that is very, very grounded in the physical world, in a physical, you know, very specific object. Tereza's work, is often kind of, especially in Paris Notebook, it's dealing with these themes of kind of, merging and going beyond the border of the body and kind of merging in this kind of oneness with other people and other kind of, beings. But it's always very grounded in places and in cities and specific kind of scene. I mentioned Milan Jaczynski, really, I think in the same kind of lyrical vein. It's very, very kind of thoughtful poetry that is in one way very interior. These lyrics are very kind of internal monologues, but often grounded in the physical world, in, picking mushrooms, this tomatoes, or digging in the dirt, and so maybe that's a theme that's kind of emerging. I don't know. I guess, often see poems that are kind of grounding. I don't know if it's a kind of distrust of being too abstract and philosophical and kind of, poetic and with a capital P or something, but often, being sure to kind of ground any metaphysical, explorations in something very specific and something very physical.
Yeah.
Almost, you could read, if you were reading into it, it's almost a distrust of the metaphysical, going too far into being airy and, too abstract. And so everything is really tied down.
I think you've summed up what I love about Czech poetry very, very well there. I think often UK poetry is all about the grounding, but we're almost afraid to take off into the metaphysics, as it were. I'm co-translating with my friend Anna Szabo her work from the Hungarian at the moment. And similarly, she's always kind of grounded in the visceral, but she's a philosopher, and I don't think many UK poets have that confidence to feel like, I'm a philosopher, I'm going to grapple with the meaning of existence. I love that. I love that combination that you're talking about.
I think that's something you see in a lot of Polish poetry as well, like Adam Zagajewski or, others, Zbigniew Herbert, whom I've only read in English translation, but the grounding, so I don't know if that's a specifically Czech thing, if that's a kind of Central European thing. You could maybe make an argument that the grounding of UK poetry is due in some part to, Ted Hughes and others in poetry and translation, bringing that Central European influence at such a key moment when, Anglophone poetry was really not at a dead end exactly, but, looking for some fresh approaches.
Yeah. You certainly could. Talking about, I think you're right, listening to the two poets there, Teresa and Kateřina. There are definitely there are parallels, I think, in listening to them. And I want to talk about that a bit more. And particularly within the frame of kind of, I'm interested in talking about female poets in Czech at the moment. Kind of post Me Too, I'm wondering what the kind of landscape's like. Last night I attended the launch of a book I'd really recommend to all our viewers, 10 Contemporary Spanish Women Poets, edited and translated by Terence Dooley. It's published by Shearsman. And there were some really shocking stats. It's a great book, but they said only 15% of poetry books published in Spain were by women. I don't know what the case is in Prague or over there, but I'm interested to know just a general feel of what the scene's like. Obviously, we published kind of equal men and women in the issue, but how is it for women over there?
I mean, I think this is really what's quite remarkable, that I don't have the statistics, but it's quite clear. And also congratulations on getting the issue, right in terms of gender balance. But I think it probably wasn't difficult, because there are really quite a few very interesting young women poets, but there are also kind of, the kind of middle generation. But when you look back, this wasn't the case. I mean, Czech poetry really in the past was completely dominated by men. And even the six Czech poets, I really found it difficult to reach to achieve this kind of gender balance. So I thought, well, I'm not going to force myself, and it's 6 poets, 2 of them are women, but the scene has changed a lot since then, and a collection like this would look different. Yeah.
Stephen, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, you were saying in the emails that we exchanged earlier, that you see kind of subtle, tinges of feminism or something in the work of both Teresa and Kateřina. I just was thinking about that, and I haven't asked Teresa about it. I should, and I should have actually, but I imagine that she would. I don't know if she'd be surprised by that comment, but I feel like she probably wouldn't label it, feminism as such.
Yeah, they're certainly not. I wouldn't call either of them activists, sort of feminist poets. But there's something about the confidence with which they use that kind of intimate female voice, and the confidence with which they.
I think that's what it is. It's confidence. It's you're speaking about your sexuality very confidently, and at the same time, you could describe this poetry as kind of confessional, but that's not it really. It is intimate, but it's also stating things quite firmly, and so I wouldn't even think about these poets as feminist. I just think they have a very strong voice, which we have to acknowledge. I mean, I'm more than happy to acknowledge it. It's something that this is what the scene looks like now. Yeah,
that's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there were the previous generation or pre-previous, there were some interesting women poets, but when you look at the kind of iconic, would-be iconic poems, I mean, there are some poems written by men about women, which I still cringe when I think about them. There's one famous one called Old Women, which we all had to learn at school. And it is really about the uselessness of old women, And it's interesting because then a generation of women came, and for instance, Viola Fischerova, who is in the 6 poets, I think she was a very interesting poet. She was someone who lived in exile, so she really wasn't known until she returned back, and I think her fate was quite tragic for various reasons, and being kind of cut off from the language, the literature, and so on. So she really just started publishing mostly after she returned, and she wrote about that subject, the kind of aging female body, very openly. And I really think she was remarkable. Not everything she wrote was maybe something that you would like to kind of bring into a collection, but there are some very powerful poems there, and there are other female poets who did the same. Yeah.
Viola Fischerova was a pretty significant influence on Teresa, and actually in Paris Notebook there's a really beautiful elegy for Viola called "On the Death of Viola Fischerova," which kind of hints at her being a kind of a guiding spirit in a way, guiding poet. So yeah. In American poetry at the moment, I think it probably holds true to a certain extent for British poetry as well. Just the way that poets, deal with issues, you mentioned Me Too, and deal with all of this, crazy stuff that's happening and has been happening, I suppose. But I think, at least I can speak confidently about American poetry, there's a bit of an expectation, for poets to deal with these things and to write about these contemporary issues, and to kind of, get out and make a statement about these issues. And I don't feel that as urgently, I think, in contemporary poetry.
It's interesting. takes a little longer perhaps to kind of percolate through.
Yeah, I think certainly people are, very tuned in and aware of everything that's happening around the world. I think it might, in part, it's maybe a cultural thing, just the way that maybe different expectations for poetry, and it's maybe a lot of different ways you could kind of try to suss that out. But yeah.
I would like to ask you more questions about specific poets that you've been translating, but there's a question here, a more general question someone's posted, which I think is interesting, perhaps thrown at this point. Lavinia Singer has asked, are there aspects of the Czech language that create particular challenges for translation or particular benefits? So that's about the language as a whole. But also I would ask that for your individual poets. Teresa, Stephan, Paris Notebooks coming out this autumn, you said there was a challenge of translating her nonchalance. So I'm interested, are there any specific challenges related to translating your poets? And also, are there any that are just about Czech to English in general? Stephan, if you'd start, that'd be great.
Sure. The thing about the nonchalance of Paris Notebook, I mean, it's this collection of, ostensibly kind of notebook poems that are not supposed to be too labored over.
So is it kind of a Frank O'Hara kind of thing?
That's interesting. Frank O'Hara is definitely who I think of when I think of poetic nonchalance. And I love Frank O'Hara deeply, but I wouldn't, it's not that type of nonchalance. It's, she has a particular and really interesting and powerful way of bringing up these really kind of deep and emotional and kind of personal moments and issues, but doing it in language that doesn't feel heavy-handed and like overly kind of crafted and thought about. And I'm not saying that the language isn't crafted. I think there's a little bit of artifice there of making it seem more nonchalant than perhaps it actually is. She uses juxtapositions a lot, where you might have a line of kind of a handful of phrases that are just, there's no kind of syntax connecting them. It's just juxtaposition. And I find myself often, wanting to kind of create that connecting tissue and kind of smooth things out, which I suppose is maybe just, that's just generally translating. You're always kind of pulling your hand back and wrestling with your own voice and how much are you, you don't want to impinge on the text at hand. Then also there's no punctuation. I think maybe there's one comma in the whole book. So she's using that kind of fluidity to suggest this open-endedness and using line breaks and things and stanza breaks instead of punctuation to kind of give, put the pauses and give certain emphasis. But at the same time, I think the language is kind of less, the word order is more flexible. So, if you're not using punctuation to really guide the reader, it opens up more of a multiplicity of possible meanings and readings than English. English doesn't have really that flexibility of word order. And of course, you can play with enjambment and things like that to surprise the reader. But, a lot of English language, anyways, her poems is just very lightly handled, and the language kind of just, phrases just kind of appear on the page and move and disappear. And I'm often attracted to, and when I'm writing my own poetry, I'm thinking a lot about the musicality of words and kind of pressurizing the language and making everything, really congeal in a way. And her work is much more kind of, there's a lot more space. And sometimes I feel uncomfortable with the space, and I want to try to kind of fill it in. So it's always, that's the kind of challenge I was talking about, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And Alexandra, to bring that back around, is there any particular challenges when working on Kateřina's work? And also, what do you think about that? Lavinia's question, is there anything about the Czech language particularly that's hard to capture in English?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a definite yes to the second question. But with Kateřina, I really love her poetry, and I hope that I will be able to do a whole book. At the same time, she has been translated by other people, including you, Claire. And I was at one particular poem where you can't say this is a better translation than the other. But I thought that maybe if we were working together, we could have come up with brilliant translation.
I should tell everyone I know no Czech. I spent a very nice drunken long weekend with her and some other poets. It was a Visegrad project. It was great fun. Yeah. It was a pleasure to go to spas in Budapest with her, and she gave me a cheeky cigarette in a flat that had been converted into a nightclub. It's all a bit of a blur. But anyway,
it's a bit of digression, but I think actually these encounters are really important and they're extremely beneficial there. We have been organizing at Literature Across Frontiers translation workshops where poets meet and they spend ideally a week together and they translate each other and they translate from languages they don't know, but it's usually via English, but there are some other languages that can serve as the bridge language. But I think what's wonderful about it is that you're completely immersed in this. You're not disturbed by anything. You just really focused on what you're doing. And I think this is really, if there's a challenge on the whole, I think that I often don't really get a chance to be so immersed in the work. And I find that, while I really love doing it, sometimes I'm just not careful enough, and I misread something. And it doesn't happen often, and it shouldn't happen, but it's also to do with the nature of the Czech language, that it is very nuanced. You have you have the cases, you have the aspect, which is a grammatical category of verbs. So you have to understand whether the verb is kind of infinitive or not infinitive and so on. But also and I think this really presents a problem for kind of non-native speakers of Czech, that you have all the prefixes that determine a very kind of subtle differences in meaning in a verb, for example. So you can have a certain root and then you have 6 different prefixes which give you the kind of nuance. And I find that this is often what people whose Czech is not good enough miss, unless they really work with with somebody else or with the poet. I think it's really important to work with the poet and discuss, even if you're sure that you understand. I think it's good to ask. Yeah. So, and I mean, Kateřina's language, I just wanted to say it's very elegant. She doesn't write fast. She doesn't over-publish. It took her 10 years to publish her latest collection. And for instance, I can't translate work that's colloquial, that uses colloquial language. I can't do that. So it's that kind of elegance that I really appreciate, and I try to. And of course, there's all the things that Stephen mentioned, all the musicality, and that you're trying to reproduce. Yeah,
elegance is a lovely word. Okay, I'm going to move on to some questions from the audience because there seems to be quite a few. What we've got here, Alex Zucker asks, I'd be curious to know if there's any poets publishing in Czech for whom Czech is not the first language. Well,
there's one in
the magazine, isn't there?
Yeah.
Olga
Slovic.
Oh, did you say her name?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, she's Polish. Yeah.
Polish. She's one of my favourites in the magazine. I think she's absolutely fantastic. Does anyone, Stephen, do you know of any others? Or is that common? Or
I don't think so.
Okay, can't see Stephen. Next question. Chris asks, I'm interested to hear more about who reads contemporary poetry. Academics, more ordinary readers. So that's a question, I suppose, about audience, the audience for Czech poetry. Is it, you know, just in the UK, I suppose, somewhere like Ireland, ordinary, nice, normal people like read poetry and consider poetry part of their heritage, whereas in England it's considered something often quite difficult or rarefied. So what's it like in
Stephen, would you be able to answer this? I mean, I'm really not sure. I know that you know, you get audiences in these events that I mentioned. They're usually small, but they're really engaged. And I don't know how many of them are also poets and how many are the general audience. I also know that the festival I mentioned, which Bernie Higgins and other people, poets like Josef Straka and Tomáš Šada and so on, organize, that's really a grassroots event. And, you know, it tries to kind of take poetry to out to the people. It works with libraries, with, you know, various places that put on poetry events. So I guess there is an audience for spoken or you know, for live events. I'm not sure how many people actually buy poetry books. That's another question.
well, yeah, that's, we're not interested in consumers.
Yeah, I mean,
But
Prague is
you know,
a university town, right? So it's like a college town, basically. So there's a great, you know, not only a great Czech department, but a great English department where a lot of these translators, or at least, you know, some of the translators of contemporary Czech poetry teach. And so there's, you know, lots of students who are really, you know, very interested in contemporary poetry, both in Czech and English. I've had, you know, over the years, many friends from the US come who are, you know, poets and professors in the US, and we've set up readings for them and they are always, time and time again, absolutely astounded at the quality and the attentiveness of the audience, and, you know, the intelligence and the way that people engage with their work and ask them questions. And, you know, so I think there is, and not only just the kind of university crowd or the student crowd, but, you know, I think in Europe in general, there's more of a kind of dailiness of literature and certainly of translation. I mean, you know, in the US, translation is almost non-existent.
yes.
And reading, you know, I think people read, but the reading of kind of literature, I think, is less. It's more of an ivory tower kind of thing, where I certainly don't think it's limited to the Czech Republic. I think in Europe in general, you know, you just see there's more bookstores. Every neighborhood seems to have a bookstore that is, you know, somehow flourishing, despite what we hear about, you know, Amazon and everything.
Yes.
So I do think there's, I think it's a European thing, a more of an intimacy with literature, more of an intimacy definitely with international literature, both contemporary and, you know, traditional.
Yeah, certainly amongst my Hungarian friends, almost everyone who's a poet is also a translator. So that rings true very much what you say. I've got a question here from Ryan McGregor. I would appreciate knowing whether Stephen's beard holds and hides poems within, which sometimes fall out at inappropriate moments, like morsels of fried egg from yesterday's breakfast.
It's funny.
But he says this is a two-part question.
Okay.
And the second part is, young Czech poets, have you noticed any particular influences in their work which have crossed over from contemporary US or British poetry? And that's quite interesting from what you were just saying, that there's a lot of cross-fertilization. Who are the big US and British poets over there who are having an influence on the younger generation?
Well, I just trimmed my beard, so it looks really
yeah, I really don't think it's this fried egg sort of beard.
Yeah.
I think it's going a bit far.
inappropriate moment for poems. So anytime a poem falls out, it's always appropriate. But for example, Justin Quinn is an Irish poet and translator and critic based in Prague. And he's done a lot of really interesting critical work about the influence of the Beats. So the Beats were, massively and continue to be massively influential here in Prague. So I think there's that. I think the last few years, conceptual poetry, people like Kenneth Goldsmith and Vanessa Place, both of whom have visited Prague 2 or 3 times in the last 5 or 6 years, that has, really emerged as a pretty significant influence, at least among, certain groups. And the waning of conceptual poetry in the United States has kind of coincided with its, gradual emergence or heightened emergence in the Czech Republic. Literature is so global now. Everybody's reading everything on the internet. You buy books, the moment they come out. And so, I think there's just so much literature at everybody's fingertips that everyone just has a choice of, it's easy to just find something that you enjoy, contemporary poets, and how that emerges in the work, maybe remains to be seen.
Yeah, mentioning the beat poets, I mean, it's almost, maybe not anymore, but it used to be a cult. And I remember this. This is just a little anecdote, but it's amazing. This was in the mid 1990s, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti came to Prague, to the Prague Writers Festival, and he was doing a signing in this large space, which is normally used for concerts or, big events and so on. And I went there, and it was kind of in the morning, 11 o'clock or noon. And I thought, I must have made a mistake. There's a rock concert on, and it was absolutely packed. There were thousands of people who came and wanted to have their Samizdat edition of Lawrence Ferlinghetti signed. And I thought it was quite incredible, that I don't think this would happen today, but this is one of my memories of how things were in the 90s. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
On a slightly darker note, I got sent this question in advance by Maria Jastrzebska. I've said that completely wrong. She's a brilliant poet and translator and a previous contributor to MPT. And her question was, I don't even know how to put this, she says, because it sounds so general, but are you experiencing the swing to fundamentalist prejudice, intolerance that is happening in, say, Poland or Hungary? And if so, has it affected your poems? More surreal, more absurd, warmest wishes. I think she's from a Polish background. I'm certainly, I don't know if the question's for me, but I'm experiencing a swing to fundamentalist prejudice and tolerance in this country, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Universal to a certain extent, I mean, you hear more about places like Hungary, but I mean, I don't know. I'm always hesitant to even talk about politics at all. But yeah, I mean, I think it's there. I think it's everywhere, really. I mean, what country isn't experiencing that?
Yes, I think that's very fair. And it's an interesting question whether that perhaps the Czech way of talking about politics might be to express that through something that's more surrealist or more absurd. Perhaps that's an interesting question. Whereas, as you said, in UK poetry, it's very much on the nail. There's just lots of very impassioned, important, direct poetry about this situation going on right now, about things like Black Lives Matter in the UK. So I suppose there's a question there that's quite interesting, how to approach politics and how different countries might approach politics in their poetry.
It's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to this. I can't think of anyone maybe An interesting question. Yeah.
Right, let me see if we've got time for a final question. I'm just scrolling through looking for something really good. People are mainly just saying it's fantastic, guys. I'm just seeing fantastic.
This book is still available. No, I think actually Kateřina's poems in this are really brilliant. You know, looking at them now, I wouldn't change anything probably. And I think the selection is, you know, of her best stuff at the time. Yeah. So, and of course the rest of it is excellent. But if you're interested in her work, you know, that's where you can go at the moment to get more.
Okay, then, well, it's 8 o'clock, so I'll perhaps wind up. But just to say, so Paris Notebook, Stephen, is out.
It'll be out in November with Verse Chorus Press. So, you know, should be available on the website and Amazon, all the usual kind of suspects, and or, you know, people can get in touch with me or whatever. But yeah, very excited about that. It's really going to be a beautiful edition. Just saw the cover the other day, and you know, they make great books, beautiful books. So very excited about that. It should be out mid-November, I think.
Congratulations. And Alexandra, anything you're excited about or you want to talk about coming up?
Well, I have actually, I'm waiting to hear from a publisher about Kateřina's poetry.
Oh, fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think really high time for her to have a whole book in English. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Well, we're really hoping for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think it's been a lovely event, a lovely discussion. Thank you ever so much for making the time to come here. And thanks again to the Arts Council, to the Czech Literary Centre, and particularly Jan, to our poets and guests. And we'll be having another digital event, everyone, at Halloween. Our next issue is a Dead Women Poets issue, and we're going to launch it with a seance, apparently. So keep your eyes peeled on social media for that. And many thanks to all those who supported the Kickstarter as well. In the meantime, many thanks for watching this evening and being part of Modern Poetry and Translations kind of community. I'm really enjoying these digital events, and I hope we can do more. And yeah, bye.
Thank
and
you.
read Czech poetry.